Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that feels like it's straight out of science fiction. I'm talking about decoding language directly from brain signals using AI, specifically when someone is typing.
It really does sound like something from a movie, doesn't it?
Right, like imagine actually being able to read someone's thoughts as they type. We'll be looking at two brand new research papers, both published just last month in February 2025. One is from Meta AI, and the other is from the Basque Center on Cognition, Brain, and Language.
Yeah, these papers are really pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible.
Absolutely. So
Oh.
to kick things off, let's talk about the big picture. What are we trying to understand here? The papers refer to this as brain to text decoding, which sounds super cool, but what does it actually mean? How does it even work?
So basically what we're trying to figure out is this. How accurately can AI reconstruct entire sentences just from looking at brain activity during typing? It's kind of like trying to crack a secret code, but instead of cryptic messages, we're deciphering brainwaves.
Okay, that makes sense. So how did they even begin to tackle this? Where did they get the data from?
Well, they had 35 healthy volunteers who agreed to participate in this experiment, and while they were typing sentences on a specially designed keyboard, their brain activity was being recorded.
Oh, wow. So they're typing away, but how are they recording their brain waves? Is this some kind of invasive procedure?
Not at all. They used two main recording techniques, actually. One is EEG, which stands for electroencephalography, and you've probably heard of that before. It's used pretty commonly in clinical settings, and it basically involves placing these electrodes on the scalp to measure the brain's electrical activity.
Oh, yeah, I've seen pictures of that. It's like wearing a cap with all those wires coming out of it, right?
Exactly. So that's EEG. The other technique they use is called MEG, which stands for magnetoencephalography, and it's kind of like EEG's more sophisticated cousin.
A more sophisticated cousin. What makes it so special?
MEG measures the tiny magnetic fields produced by the brain's electrical activity, which are even fainter than the electrical signals themselves.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So it's like super sensitive then. But how does that help with understanding language?
It's all about signal quality. Think of it like listening to your favorite band live in concert. That's MEG, versus listening to a bootleg recording, that's EEG. The live version will give you a much richer and clearer sound.
Right, because you're getting all the nuances and details. So I guess MEG gives a much clearer picture of what's happening in the brain during typing compared to EEG.
Exactly. And that clearer picture is crucial when you're trying to decode something as complex as language.
Got it. So they have these volunteers typing away and they're recording their brain activity with EEG and MEG. But the big question is, can AI actually translate those signals into sentences that make sense? I mean, can they really read their minds, so to speak?
The results are pretty impressive, especially with MEG. To measure accuracy, they use something called a character error rate, or CER for short. Think of it like a spelling test for the AI. The lower the CER, the better the AI is doing at decoding the characters.
Okay, I see. So a lower CER means the AI is getting more characters right.
Exactly. The average CER with MEG was only 32%, which means that the AI was getting almost 7 out of every 10 characters correct, just from brain activity.
Yeah. So basically, the AI could read their minds with 70% accuracy. That's mind-blowing.
And it gets even better. The best MEG performer had a CER of only 19%, meaning it was decoding more than 8 out of 10 characters correctly. They're getting remarkably close to perfectly reconstructing entire sentences just from brain activity.
That's wild. I mean, 19% error rate. We're practically at the point where we can have a full conversation with someone just by looking at their brain activity as they type. Do they give any specific examples of sentences that the AI was able to decode?
They do, and there's one that's particularly impressive. One participant typed a sentence that was absolutely riddled with typos. I'm talking about ek benefukui hierarchical.
Oof, that's rough. I can barely even read that. Did the AI just crash and burn?
Nope, not at all. The AI actually managed to decode it perfectly, correcting all the typos in the process. It correctly translated it as el beneficio supera los riesgos, which is Spanish for the benefit outweighs the risks.
Hold on. So it not only decoded the brain signals, but it also corrected all the typos? That's like having a superpower autocorrect directly connected to your brain. What kind of sorcery is this?
It is pretty remarkable, and it really makes you think about the possibilities, especially for people who have difficulty communicating using traditional methods. This could be a huge breakthrough for them.
That's a great point. So this technology has the potential to completely change the way we think about communication. especially for individuals who might not be able to speak or type. It's like opening up a whole new world of possibilities. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to go back to basics for a moment. How does the brain actually transform a thought into a sentence? What are the steps involved?
That's where the second paper, From Thought to Action, comes in. It delves into what's called the brain's language hierarchy, and it tries to understand how our brains take that initial thought and translate it into the specific keystrokes needed to express it.
Okay, I'm all ears. I love getting into the nitty-gritty of how the brain works.
It's fascinating stuff. So think about it. When you want to say something, you don't just start randomly saying words or typing letters, right? There's a whole process that happens in your brain. You first have the thought, then you choose the words to express that thought, then those words are broken down into syllables, and finally your brain directs your muscles to produce those sounds, either through speech or typing.
So our brains are basically acting like master conductors, making sure everything happens in the right order and at the right time, kind of like an orchestra playing a symphony, except it's a symphony of language.
Exactly. It's a beautifully coordinated process, and the researchers in this study wanted to figure out exactly how it unfolds in the brain.
Makes sense. So how did they actually study this? Did they attach even more sensors or something?
They focused on 4 key levels of linguistic features: context, words, syllables, and letters. Think of them as detectives, trying to uncover the clues hidden within the brain's electrical signals.
I like that analogy. So they're looking for these clues at different levels, like a hierarchy. But how do they know what they're looking for? How do they actually decode those clues?
They used some pretty clever machine learning techniques to decode each of these features from the brain recordings. Basically, they're tracking how the brain's representation of each feature changes over time, like watching a movie of the brain in action.
So it's like they're time travelers, mapping out the brain's journey from thought to action. It's incredible to think about all that happening in our heads every time we type something. But did they actually find evidence to support this step-by-step process we talked about? Does the brain really follow this hierarchy?
They did. The research confirms that our brains do indeed follow this hierarchical structure when producing language. First, they process the overall context of the sentence, kind of like figuring out the destination before planning a road trip.
Right, you can't figure out the individual steps until you know where you're going. So context is like setting the stage for the entire performance. What happens next?
Once the context is established, the brain shifts its focus to the individual words, then breaks those words down into syllables, and finally zooms in on each letter to be typed. It's a remarkably efficient and organized process.
It's amazing how our brains can do all of that so effortlessly without us even realizing it. It's like a beautifully choreographed dance with each element flowing seamlessly into the next. But wait, there's one thing I don't understand. If our brains are processing all these letters at the same time, wouldn't that create a jumbled mess of signals? How does the brain keep everything organized and prevent those letter representations from getting mixed up?
That is a great question, and that's exactly where this concept of a dynamic neural code comes in. It's like a sophisticated traffic management system for your brain, making sure all those simultaneous signals don't collide and cause a mental gridlock.
Okay, I am intrigued. Traffic management for brain signals. This is getting really interesting. Tell me more about this dynamic neural code. It sounds like the key to understanding how our brains handle this multitasking marvel.
Imagine a stage with multiple spotlights, each representing a different letter. Now, as the brain prepares to type a word, these spotlights move around, focusing on each letter in a specific sequence. This movement is what keeps the signals representing each letter distinct and prevents them from interfering with one another.
So it's like a choreographed dance of brain activity, with each letter taking its turn in the spotlight, preventing any signal confusion. That's a pretty neat system. But is there any particular order to this dance? Do certain types of information, like context or letters, get more spotlight time than others?
Absolutely. There's a hierarchy to this neural dance floor. Information about the sentence's context, remember that's like setting the stage, that changes slowly, like the overall theme of a play, lingering in the background and providing a foundation for everything else. But letter representations, they change very rapidly, like quick actions of individual actors on stage popping in and out of the spotlight as the brain prepares to execute each keystroke.
Okay, so context is like the background music, setting the mood, while the letters are like the lead dancers, taking center stage for their brief but impactful performance. This dynamic neural code is really mind-blowing. It's amazing how our brains manage to juggle all these different levels of information so effortlessly, even when we're typing something as simple as a text message. But I'm curious, was there anything else that surprised the researchers about how our brains handle the typing process?
There was actually. They noticed some really interesting patterns in the types of errors that the AI made when decoding the brain signals. Remember those character error rates we were talking about?
Yeah, the spelling test for the AI.
Exactly. Well, it turns out those errors weren't completely random. The AI was much more likely to confuse a letter with another letter that's physically close to it on the keyboard.
Oh, interesting. So if someone meant to type the letter A, but the AI decoded it as an S, that's because those keys are right next to each other on the keyboard.
Exactly. They call this the keyboard distance effect. It's a pretty cool finding because it suggests that the AI isn't just picking up on abstract letter representations in the brain, but it's actually tapping into the brain's motor plans, the signals that actually control our finger movements.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's like the AI is actually learning to read the brain's intentions, not just the final output.
That's a great way to put it. And to further confirm this connection between motor processes and brain-to-text decoding, they did a special analysis called clustering. This revealed that the AI had automatically grouped letters together based purely on their location on the keyboard.
Wait, hold on. So the AI was never explicitly taught about keyboard layouts, but it figured it out on its own just by looking at the brain activity patterns.
That's exactly right. It's as if the AI was saying, hey, these brain signals seem to be clustered together. I bet those correspond to keys that are physically close to each other on this keyboard thing. It's amazing how these AI systems can uncover hidden relationships and patterns that we might not even be aware of.
This is really starting to paint a comprehensive picture of how our brains take us from abstract thought all the way to the physical action of typing. It's a complex interplay of language processing, motor planning, and this dynamic neural code acting as the conductor, making sure everything works in harmony. But let's talk a bit more about the language processing itself. The papers mentioned using powerful language models like GPT-2 and FastText. Can you explain what these models are and how they help with decoding brain signals?
Of course, these language models are incredible tools that help us understand the structure and meaning of language. Think of them like super dictionaries combined with grammar rulebooks. They've been trained on massive amounts of text and code, which allows them to capture the nuances of human language in ways that traditional methods just can't.
Wow, that's impressive. So they're like super smart language experts. But how do they actually use these models to crack the code of our brains? How do they connect those language models to those brain signals?
Instead of trying to decode individual letters or words directly from the brain signals, they use these models to create what we call vector representations for different linguistic features. Imagine a vast multidimensional space where each word, syllable, or context is represented by a unique point. Words with similar meanings or grammatical roles are clustered together in this space, kind of like stars forming constellations.
So instead of looking for a specific letter A in the brain signal, they're looking for its corresponding point in this vast constellation of language, which captures its meaning and relationships to other words.
Precisely. This approach allows us to capture much richer information about the language being processed in the brain. We're not just looking for specific words, we're uncovering the underlying relationships between them.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So it's like giving the AI a crash course in linguistics,
Yeah.
helping it understand how words relate to each other and how they're used in different contexts. And by analyzing those relationships in the brain signals, the AI can make more accurate predictions about the intended words and sentences, right?
Exactly. And the real beauty of this approach is that it allows us to decode not only individual words, but also the context in which they are used. This gives us a much more complete picture of what's going on in the brain during language production.
This is incredible. This dynamic neural code and these advanced language models are really changing our understanding of how the brain works. It's exciting to see how these tools are helping us decode the symphony of brain activity that underlies something as fundamental as language. But I think it's important to zoom out for a moment and consider the bigger picture. What does this research tell us about the brain's remarkable ability to process information, not just in the realm of language, but in other cognitive domains as well?
You're absolutely right. This research strongly suggests that the dynamic neural code isn't just some special trick for handling language. It's likely a fundamental principle of how our brains process information in general. We're starting to see similar patterns of dynamic encoding in other cognitive areas like motor control, decision-making, and even memory.
So the same principles that allow our brains to effortlessly switch between typing letters and, say, planning our next move in a game of chess are also at play when we're trying to remember where we parked our car or deciding what to have for dinner.
Precisely. It seems like this dynamic neural code is the brain's secret weapon for handling the incredible complexities of the world around us. It allows us to process information from multiple sources simultaneously, make sense of it all, and then use that information to guide our actions.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the incredible power and adaptability of the human brain. It's amazing to see how these cutting-edge AI tools are helping us unlock the secrets of this most complex and fascinating organ. And as we continue to explore the frontiers of brain research, I'm sure we'll uncover even more astonishing insights into what makes us who we are.
Absolutely. It's a journey of discovery that I'm thrilled to be a part of. And who knows, maybe one day we'll be able to have entire conversations just by thinking about them. The future of communication might be a lot quieter, but certainly no less expressive.
Well, that's a thought-provoking idea to consider. And on that note, I think it's time for us to take a short break. But don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're going to shift gears and explore the potential real-world applications of this mind-blowing technology. We'll discuss how brain-to-text decoding could transform the lives of individuals with communication impairments and maybe even revolutionize the way we interact with the digital world. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into brain-to-text decoding. Before the break, we were talking about how the brain manages to process multiple letters at the same time without things getting jumbled up. It's like some kind of super efficient mental juggling act.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how the brain keeps everything organized, and that's where this idea of a dynamic neural code comes in.
Right, you were just starting to explain that. Can you unpack that a bit more?
hmm
What is this dynamic neural code, and how does it help the brain manage all this information?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you have a stage with a bunch of spotlights, each spotlight representing a different letter. As the brain gets ready to type a word, these spotlights move around, shining on each letter in a specific sequence. This constant movement ensures that the signals representing each letter stay separate and don't interfere with each other.
Okay, so it's like a carefully choreographed dance of brain activity with each letter taking its turn in the spotlight. That makes sense. But is there a specific order to this dance? Do certain types of information like context or letters get more spotlight time than others?
Absolutely. There's definitely a hierarchy to this neural dance floor. Information about the sentence's context, the overall meaning and purpose, that changes slowly, kind of like the backdrop of a play. It sets the stage but stays relatively stable. But the letter representations, those change rapidly, like the quick movements of individual actors on that stage, popping in and out of the spotlight as the brain gets ready to type each letter.
So it's like the context is the background music setting the mood, while the letters are the lead dancers, each getting their moment to shine. It's a fascinating analogy. But I'm curious, did the researchers notice anything else about how the brain handles this whole typing process? Anything unexpected?
Actually, yeah, they did. They found some interesting patterns in the types of errors the AI made when decoding the brain signals. Remember how we talked about the character error rate, that kind of spelling test for the AI?
Yeah, I remember.
Well, they discovered that those errors weren't completely random. The AI was more likely to mix up a letter with another letter that's physically close to it on the keyboard.
Oh, interesting. So like if someone meant to type the letter A, but the AI decoded it as an S, that's because those two keys are neighbors on the keyboard.
Exactly. They call this the keyboard distance effect.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty big deal because it suggests that the AI isn't just picking up on some abstract concept of letters in the brain, but it's actually tuning into the brain's motor plans, those signals that control our finger movements as we type.
Wow, that's wild. It's like the AI is learning to read the brain's intentions, not just the final output on the screen.
It really is. And to make sure this link between motor processes and brain-to-text decoding was real, they did another analysis called clustering. And guess what? It turned out that the AI had automatically grouped letters together based on their location on the keyboard, even though it had never been specifically told anything about keyboard layouts.
Wait, hold on. You're saying the AI figured out the keyboard layout just by observing patterns in brain activity?
Exactly. It's as if the AI was thinking, hey, these brain signals seem to be grouped together. I bet those correspond to keys that are close to each other on this thing called a keyboard. It's incredible how AI can uncover these hidden relationships and patterns in data that we might completely miss.
It's like the AI is a detective, piecing together clues to solve a mystery. That's pretty mind-blowing. So this means that when we're designing future brain-computer interfaces, we need to think about how the physical layout of input devices maps onto the brain's motor system, right?
Absolutely. It's not enough to just understand the brain's abstract code. We also need to think about how that code interacts with the physical world, how it translates into actual movements and actions.
This is all starting to come together now. It's like we're building a bridge between the brain's inner world of thoughts and the outer world of actions. We've got this dynamic neural code orchestrating the whole process, and now we're starting to understand how it connects to the physical movements involved in typing. But I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, those powerful language models like GPT-2 and fast text. Can you remind us what those models are and how they help researchers decode brain signals?
Sure, those language models are incredibly powerful tools for understanding the structure and meaning of language. It's like they've read every book and article ever written and have learned all the rules of grammar and syntax.
So like ultimate language experts.
Exactly. And what makes them so useful for this kind of research is that they can create what we call vector representations for different linguistic features. Imagine this vast, multidimensional space where each word, syllable, or even a whole chunk of context has its own unique point. Words with similar meanings or grammatical roles tend to cluster together in this space, forming these kind of conceptual constellations.
Okay, so instead of trying to find a specific letter or word in the brain signal, they're looking for its corresponding point in this vast map of language, which captures its meaning and relationships to other words.
You got it. This approach allows us to extract so much more information about what's happening in the brain during language processing. We're not just looking for individual words, we're looking at the web of meanings and connections between them. It's like giving the AI a deep understanding of how language actually works.
I see. So it's not just about decoding the letters, it's about understanding the meaning behind them, the context, the nuances of human language. And by using these sophisticated language models, researchers can get a much richer and more accurate picture of what's happening in the brain during language production.
That's exactly right. And the beauty of this approach is that it can be applied not only to single words, but also to entire phrases and sentences. This gives us a much more holistic view of how the brain constructs language and expresses meaning.
This dynamic neural code and these advanced language models are truly revolutionizing our understanding of how the brain works. It's incredible to see how these tools are helping us decode the symphony of brain activity that underlies something as fundamental as language. But before we get carried away with all the amazing science, I think it's important to take a step back and consider the bigger picture. What does this research tell us about the brain's amazing ability to process information, not just in the context of language, but in other areas of cognition as well?
That's a great point. This research strongly suggests that this dynamic neural code isn't just a special trick the brain uses for language. It's likely a core principle that underlies how our brains process information in general. We're seeing similar patterns of dynamic encoding in other areas of cognition, like motor control, decision-making, and even memory.
So the same principles that allow our brains to seamlessly shift between typing letters and, say, planning our next move in a game of chess are also at play when we're trying to remember where we parked the car or choosing what to eat for dinner.
Precisely. It seems like this dynamic neural code is the brain's secret weapon for dealing with the complexity of the world around us. It lets us process information from many different sources at the same time, make sense of it all, and then use that information to guide our actions.
This deep dive has been absolutely incredible. It's amazing to see how these cutting-edge AI tools are helping us unlock the secrets of this most complex and fascinating organ, the human brain. And as we continue to push the boundaries of brain research, I have no doubt that we'll discover even more mind-blowing insights into what makes us who we are.
I completely agree. This is such an exciting time to be involved in brain research, and who knows what incredible discoveries lie ahead. Maybe one day we'll even be able to have entire conversations just by thinking them. The future of communication could be much quieter, but no less expressive.
Well, that's a fascinating thought to ponder. And speaking of the future, when we come back, we'll shift gears and explore the potential real-world applications of this incredible technology. We'll discuss how brain-to-text decoding could change the lives of individuals with communication challenges and maybe even revolutionize the way we interact with the digital world. Stay with us. And we're back, diving deep into the world of brain-to-text decoding. It's been a wild ride so far, hasn't it?
It really has. We've been exploring some pretty groundbreaking research, stuff that could have a huge impact on how we understand the brain and how we communicate in the future.
Absolutely. We've talked about this amazing dynamic neural code, the brain's intricate dance of language processing, and those powerful AI language models that are helping us crack the code. But now I want to get practical. What are the real-world applications of this technology? What are you most excited about?
One of the most promising areas is assistive communication. Imagine people who have lost the ability to speak or type, maybe due to conditions like locked-in syndrome or ALS. This technology could give them back their voice. They could communicate their thoughts and feelings just by thinking about typing.
That would be life-changing for so many people, giving them a way to connect with the world again. It's hard to overstate how much of an impact that could have.
Exactly. It's about restoring their autonomy, their ability to participate in life on their own terms.
Are there other areas where this technology could make a big difference, beyond assistive communication, I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Think about how we interact with computers in the digital world. Right now, we rely on keyboards, mice, touchscreens, voice commands. But what if we could control our devices with our minds?
Wow, that sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
Yeah.
Like mind-controlled computers, virtual reality that responds to our thoughts. It's mind-boggling to think about the
It
possibilities.
really is. We could be writing emails, browsing the internet, creating art and music, all just by using our thoughts. It could completely revolutionize the way we interact with technology.
It's exciting, but a little daunting too, right? I mean, anytime you have a technology this powerful, there are bound to be challenges, ethical considerations we need to be really thoughtful about.
You're absolutely right. We need to make sure this technology is used responsibly, ethically, and equitably. We need to think about privacy, security, and how to make sure it benefits everyone, not just a select few.
It's a huge responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity to use this technology for good. What do you think are the most important steps we need to take as a society to ensure that brain detects decoding is developed and used in a way that benefits humanity as a whole?
Well, for starters, we need to have open and honest conversations about the potential benefits and risks. We need to bring diverse voices to the table, including ethicists, policymakers, researchers, people with disabilities, the general public. Everyone needs to have a say in shaping the future of this technology.
I totally agree. We need a collaborative approach, one that prioritizes transparency, inclusivity, and a deep understanding of the ethical implications. It's a big task, but I'm hopeful that we can rise to the challenge.
Me too. This journey into the world of brain-to-text decoding has been incredible. We've explored the science, the potential, and the challenges, and I think we can all agree that this is a field with immense power to transform lives and reshape the future.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a privilege to have you as our guide on this deep dive. Your insights have been invaluable. So as we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember about brain-to-text decoding?
I think the most important thing to remember is that this technology is not about reading minds or controlling people. It's about understanding the human brain, unlocking its potential, and using that knowledge to help others. It's about empowering people, fostering connection, and building a future where communication barriers no longer exist.
What a powerful message. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. And to our listeners, thank you for being here. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those minds curious.